Now we come to the writing part of this class, which is another one of my favorite topics. And I want to just briefly explain why we're doing this. Writing is thinking, right? Augustine said, I write to make progress, and I make progress by writing. I don't think you or I know exactly what we think about something until and unless we can write it out. In speech we can be really sloppy, right? You can get away with a lot of just slop when you're talking. But when you ever see a transcript from a sermon or a speech you thought was inspiring and really great, then you saw the transcript and the words were it was kind of embarrassing. It was weak and it had some issues and problems. When you put something in writing, you can see all the flaws. You can quickly see if first, second, and third are these ideas really parallel. You can see that if the person said because and then something, was this really the cause? Or if they said consequently and then what followed, was that really the result? So in writing, there's just no substitute for writing to help us think clearly. As Sir Francis Bacon wrote in 1625, reading maketh a full man, conference, I guess conversation, a ready man, and writing an exact man or woman. He wrote this in 1625. Um, so that's why we have writing assignments, so that you can get very precise in your thinking. So even in sermons or teaching, I don't like myself to read a manuscript because it seems to put up a wall between me and the audience. But I still like to write out at least key paragraphs or sentences, um, and especially pay attention to connections. If I write it out, in fact, I learn, I discover by writing. A lot of my writing projects, in fact, all of them actually, I I wanted to do them because I wanted to learn, I wanted to discover. And the process of writing, sometimes and you probably had this experience too, you're writing something down and you learn by writing. And maybe it's your third or fourth draft when it clicks and you realize, oh, that's how this idea fits with that other idea. So we're not saying that you have to be a great writer to be a great servant of Jesus. We are saying, though, that the better you are with words, the more useful you will be to Jesus. Right? Jesus is the Word. He's the Word of God. So all things being equal, no one should be better at words or with words than us. And no one should care more about using the right word and the best word and the precise word than us. Because what have we been handed? What are we here in seminary to do? To be equipped for our calling to handle the word. So as we go through these 2 weeks on writing, it will help you get better grades. It will help you write better papers. But it's also way more important than that. This is so essential for what God has called you to communicate the word of Christ, the gospel, that the good news that people must know to be saved. One other quote, which I thought was helpful to me, this is from N.T. Wright, and when he says that he tells his doctoral students about writing papers. He said, first of all, before you do all the footnoting and all that, that comes later. But first, think about if your 10-year-old niece would ask you what you're writing about. What would you say to her? He said, if she asks, what are you working on? You'll say two quite simple things. And this gives you the framework of your piece. Then imagine your 15-year-old nephew who asks, yeah, but what does that actually mean? Well, that gives you your subheadings. And then you work your way steadily up, Tom Wright says, and so that the professor is the last person you're thinking of to fill in the footnotes. Most students do it the other way around. They think, what does the professor want to see? They throw all that stuff in, and then the thing is shapeless and without definite statements with meaning. So that seems helpful, right? If you're working on could be a sermon, could be a lesson, could be a paper. Pretend first you're talking to a child and they ask, what are you working on? Tell them just a couple things, and that's your big idea. And then if someone a little bit older asks, but what does that mean? Well, then how would you break that up to explain it to them? And that's your subheadings. And then at the end, you get all that footnoting and support and something to give to your professor. What I like about that is Tom Wright was saying um, sometimes we get kind of full of ourselves in academics, right? We say things like close the aperture, when all we really mean is shut the window. But we're academics. We got to make it sound really stuffy and profound. And we got to get over that, right? We got to get over ourselves. Maybe people are impressed with that, but I don't think God is. In fact, I'm sure God isn't. And we shouldn't be that impressed with ourselves either. We, if we've been called and commissioned to share the word of Jesus Christ, we want to use the most simplest but accurate, precise word we can to communicate the good news of Jesus. So, until and unless you and I can explain whatever we're working on to a teenager, I don't think we understand it. Right? Anyone can just stay up here, highfalutin in abstract categories, and get a polite applause when you're done. But only when you can explain it to someone who's not initiated and maybe not all that mature yet, if you can get it down to their level and still more or less accurately convey what you're doing, that's how you learn it yourself. So with that said, there's this book that changed my life. I had it in an academic version of it in my college years, and it's now available in non-academic form. It's called Style by Joseph Williams. There's multiple editions. He is now passed away, so he's no longer updating them. But the one you want is the yellow cover. It's a non-academic. It doesn't have all the exercises, but just the guts and the bolts. There's a couple chapters that I made available to you on Moodle that I'm going to be reading from now with you, portions of it. But if you want the whole thing, I got this for $5 on Amazon. It's a hardcover, so it's very reasonable and just life-changing. The principles in this book that I'm going to share with you now, they have changed my life. I use them every single day. When I communicate the gospel, whether it's speaking or in writing, it just works. So what Williams is doing is he's writing a book for how English speakers communicate, how English listeners expect to be talked to, how English readers expect to be written to. And in English, in the West, we expect directness and clarity. Now, if you're in an Eastern context, maybe not so much. I know in China, I've spent a couple years there teaching English in China, and it's much more of an indirect approach. Their premier would be giving talks, and he would be talking around the topic, and as a Westerner, I would, even to the translator, I would say, like, what is the point? Well, my students knew the point. They got the point. They understood, even though he's speaking indirectly, what was the meaning. In America, we are much more direct. In fact, when I was, I'd visit my students' homes a few times, and it'd be getting late, and I said, well, hey, I gotta go. And they would always say, no, don't go, stay. And so, all right, I'll stay. And I'd 2 or 3 more times, I have to go, it's getting late. No, stay. And I learned later that, yeah, I really should have gone. In fact, they really wanted me to go. They were just being polite. They're Easterners. And so they thought I would understand. They had to say, no, stay, when really, I really should have gone. So this book is methods for how to communicate in English, which for most of us, that's what we're going to be doing, and how to be heard, and what readers and listeners expect, how they expect to be spoken to and written to. And Williams, so it's not about grammar, it's not about syntax. Some of us, maybe a lot of us, have not had great educations for just basic English. Well, you can overcome that with a grammar, right? Read a grammar and read it and practice it, and you can learn. In fact, for many of us, learning Greek is how we learned English, because you get to another language, and that's how that's what a participle is. Oh, that's what that means in English. So a lot of this we're not served well in junior high and high school and even grade school, but you can remedy that with a good grammar and practice. This is not about grammar, it's about style. It's how Good writers write. So with that said, I want to read to you a few parts. This first is from, you have chapter 2 and 3 on Moodle. This, though, is from Roman numeral chapter 11 in the preface. And just to encourage you, he says, when a piece of writing confuses us, we often assume that we are not up to its demands. Difficult a passage may be, but its complexity is often more seeming than substantial. We have seen hundreds of students experience relief from doubts about their own competence when they realize that if they are unable to understand an article or monograph, it is not necessarily because they are incompetent, but because its author couldn't write clearly. That liberation is a valuable experience. That's true in seminary. So a lot of the big shot theologians, they were German. And German is an awful language. It's a ponderous, heavy language. It fits the German people, right? The French their language just sounds like love. And the German language just sounds like a bit miffed, a bit heavy and ponderous. And it's very convoluted. The Germans invent words by slamming other words together. And they have these really big, humongous words. And the verb is always at the end. So it's just a convoluted language. Mark Twain said German is like a dog that jumped into the Atlantic Ocean, swam to the other side, and got out with a verb in its mouth. So just know that a lot of us, probably all of us who teach you in the seminary with these PhDs in theology and Bible, we have read a lot of German authors. And it doesn't translate very well into English. We read them because they wrote important theology. They were significant thinkers in the 20th century and now early 21st century, but they just did not write well. And a lot of us, we think, well, that's the style, that's what you do. And so we imitate that and we assign textbooks because we like the content, but even though the style was pretty bad, and then we graduate people from seminary and they can't preach anymore because they sound like angry Germans too. And so it can be a mess. So just know this is a problem in grad school, in seminaries. And don't feel bad if you read a paragraph and are not sure what the author is saying. The problem may not be you, it may be in that person. They're just maybe a bad writer. Williams says, page 5 and 6, that reasons for bad writing are we try to impress. Again, he calls it academies, or sometimes in the legal profession, legalese, where you have these this style of writing and this jargon, and so the hoi polloi, the common people can't, the uninitiated, they can't follow along. It's an inside language, and it's just bad. It stops communication, and if you you might sound impressive because people can't understand you, but actually what you're saying may not be all that smart. It just sounds hard to understand. So he says, try not to impress people, aim to communicate. Right? Again, if you're, this should register so clearly for ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Jesus, we want people to be impressed with Jesus. Our job is just to, as clearly as we possibly can, winsomely communicate Jesus. Fight the temptation to try to impress people with ourselves. So, okay, that went faster than I thought it would. I'm going to take a break now in this lecture and come back with the point of what Williams says, some great life-changing tips on how to communicate clearly in English.